In today's video, we're talking about specific ND filters from a company called Polar Pro and Freewell. These are variable ND filters, and a lot of people have been asking me which one should they get. One's more expensive, one's a lot cheaper, but it all comes down to overall build quality and picture. Let's have a closer look. Starting off with the famous Peter McKinnon Polar Pro filters. Now, Polar Pro loves to say how their ND filters are made out of quartz. And the quartz element glass they use in their ND filters allows for them to create optical clarity, very good optical clarity for that matter. However, it is not scratch resistant. I actually got a little nick on my variable ND filter, but fortunately enough, it does not affect my picture quality. I got lucky there. So you still have to take care of these ND filters. You also get a protective case, which is metal and it has a magnetic lid. And you also have a hard rubber cap, which goes on the ND filter, protecting it from any scratches. I actually really like this feature because you can just screw it onto your lens and then remove the cap. And there you go, no fingerprints on your ND filter. When it comes down to the Freewell ND filter, we have a plastic magnetic case, and on top of that, we have a magnetic cover, which is made out of aluminum, so it snaps right onto your filter. So you don't ever have to actually align it perfectly, it just snaps right on. A lot of their filters have this magnetic feature, and I love this little touch because it does save you time when you're putting your cap back on. Now, Freewell doesn't exactly disclose what type of glass they use in their filters, but they are stating that it's scratch-proof, waterproof, and oil-proof. Now, I'm a pretty big skeptic when it comes down to a company saying that their filters are scratch-proof. Nothing is scratch-proof. However, they can absorb some sort of scratches, maybe from your keys in your pocket or something like that. But eventually, before you know it, you will scratch up these optics if you don't take care of them. So constantly keep them in a case and constantly have that lens cap cover on them. When it comes down to build quality, I think Polar Pro is slightly better. When you pick up the filter, it feels heavier. It feels like it's made out of higher quality parts. However, neither of these filters are made cheaply. They both feel good, but Polar Pro does have that slighter edge. Both the adjustment rings on the Freewell and Polar Pro ND filters work extremely well. They can limit and control exposure seamlessly, especially if you decide to change exposure during your video. It's seamless, it's smooth, and it works. Both Polar Pro and Freewell have the 2 to 5 stop and the 6 to 9 stop variable ND filters. However, in today's video, we're mainly going to be focusing on the 2 to 5 stop since this is the most popular option. Now, here's a quick note. Never ever ever stack your UV filter and ND filter together. Your picture quality will degrade, especially when it comes down to sharpness and color accuracy. Now, to avoid bias, I'm going to put footages from both these ND filters side by side without naming them, and you let me know in the comment section below which filter you think is which. And then after we look at the footage, we'll assess and talk about it. Now, unfortunately, due to all the fires and all the crazy stuff that's happening, I wasn't able to venture out of my patio, so I hope that footage gave you some sort of idea when it comes down to exposure, shadows, highlights, and overall color. I did show you log footage from the Sony A7S III, and I showed you color graded footage. In Final Cut Pro, I do my color correcting and color grading really quickly and easily. Basically, when you're working with S-Log footage, all we really have to do is crush the blacks, play around with the midtones and highlights, possibly add some contrast, definitely add some saturation, and then add your own little color tint. This will allow you to color grade and color correct your footage all in one panel in Final Cut Pro. But it doesn't matter which video editor you're using, just make sure you have the option to change those parameters. From my experience comparing both of these filters together, I did notice that there is definitely a color change between the two. First things first, I noticed a massive exposure change. The Polar Pro actually makes the footage darker at the 5 mark. The Freewell filter is slightly brighter in exposure. That's pretty funny since both filters are meant to expose the footage the same. The Freewell definitely brighter than the Polar Pro, and by looking at the video scopes, you can definitely see what I'm talking about. Not only is the exposure different, but so is the saturation. I noticed that Freewell exaggerates the saturation in its colors. By looking at the RGB parade, you can easily see how reds, greens, and blues are much more scattered throughout the graph, and they're much higher up and lower than on the Polar Pro video scopes. When it comes down to sharpness and overall optical clarity, I did notice that both stacked up extremely well. Now, the final verdict between both of these ND filters, which one should you get and why? It depends on your budget, and it depends on what type of videos you're shooting. And I know that's the answer you guys hate, so let me explain. If you're shooting a lot of videos indoors, for example, interviews or receptions or parties, you most likely don't even need an ND filter. But before I bite my tongue, everyone should have an ND filter just in case. But if most of your shoots are controlled indoors, go for the Freewell. But if you're a wedding filmmaker, you shoot a lot outdoors, then you definitely need to go with the higher end model, and that is the Polar Pro, because you're gonna get more accurate picture and you're gonna get exactly what you paid for, and that is higher quality components in your ND filter. You can't go wrong with either of these, but it also depends on your budget and the type of videos that you shoot. The Freewell ND filters, you can actually get the 2:5 and 6:9 stop for almost a third of the price of getting both the Polar Pro 2:5 and 6:9 stops. So that's something you really have to consider. In my opinion, I'm probably gonna stick to using the Polar Pro filters more since I get more accurate colors, and it looks like I can limit and control exposure slightly better on those filters too. If you're interested in picking up either of these filters, again, as I said before, you can't go wrong with either one. Check out the links down below, and I'll see you guys in another video. Peace.